Thank you to the source of creation for being everything, for being this live webinar, for being everyone who's here. Okay, I'm just enjoying feeling everyone who's here. Thank you for being our ancestors. And thank you to the ancestors for the presence of the physical form, the physical body, without which we wouldn't be having nearly as much fun as we are right now, right? Thank you to the great eternal tradition of wisdom, without whose anchor to the source of creation and the flow of wisdom, also none of this would be. So thank you to the holy tradition. Thank you to the mother of the universe. May tonight's session be wonderful. All right. So briefly, what is energy healing? I know some of you guys already know what this is, but we're just going to go over the basics for a minute. So energy healing is a process of using consciousness to heal the body. And we know the body is essentially made of consciousness, even though it seems physical. And the physicality of the body is a byproduct of consciousness folding and folding and folding and folding on itself until eventually we start to get dense matter and eventually we get physical material. So it goes to follow that if the physiology starts to feel ill or uncomfortable, then consciousness can have an influence or effect on the physiology in such a way as to bring balance back. So that's what we're doing in energy healing. Instead of going and taking an herb, which has consciousness in it and some intelligence, instead of taking the herb to re-educate the body, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with taking herbs. They're great. Medicines, herbs, whatever you need to take them, it's fine. But the point is that energy healing is a way of efficiently kind of bypassing a lot of procedures and extra steps in the healing process, basically. Because whatever intelligence is in the herb is somewhere in the universe. And our consciousness is as big as the universe. So our consciousness, the consciousness of you in your body, can access that intelligence that's in the herb or in the medicine directly, even without necessarily taking the medicine. Okay? So what we're doing in these live webinars is we're going into the fine mechanics of exactly how do we do this? How do we harness the infinite potential of our consciousness in order to affect evolutionary transformation for the physiology, in order to promote health, in order to, in this case, into the case of today's webinar, the title is Clearing Karmic Blocks for Manifestation, or for Manifesting. So we're going to talk a little bit about the whole process of how consciousness manifests, how we go from nothing to something. And in energy healing, what we're doing is we're using our attention, which is consciousness. We're using our attention and we're directing it in a very concise and intelligent manner to produce specific effects on the physiology, with the environment, on anything you want to manifest, on your bank account, on your car, on whatever, your family, whatever we want to manifest. It's the focus of attention, which is the key principle. Attention is consciousness. Attention is folding back into whatever it is that we want to affect. That's basically it. But there's a whole art to that. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. And the important thing I felt that the last webinar was very nice, and I tried something new, which was to primarily focus on just the healings, just the transformations and transformations and transformations. So I think we're going to kind of stay with that theme for this webinar as well, because I know that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the good stuff is. So as much as I can, I will fill in the gaps in between as we're doing all these healings to help provide a foundation for understanding the experience of the healings. As the consciousness starts to direct in particular directions, energy starts to move, and that's nice, It's really nice to understand exactly why it's moving and how it's moving and what makes it move like that compared to like how it was moving a minute ago. Okay, so that's my job, is to be the mouth, but your job is to be the source of everything. So thank you all for being the source of everything. And now I'm just going to look into the collective and see what I see and let you know what I see. And we're going to start diving into the process. So I'm looking into tonight's collective, and I'm seeing a lot of variation as I'm looking across the field of tonight's collective. So from individual to individual, from household to household. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to shift awareness. I love telling you what I'm doing. I'm shifting awareness to the web of life. And at the web of life level, what's going on with our collective. So rather than looking into, it's good to look into individual physiologies, because that helps me also direct attention into whatever areas you need in order to feel better. But over and above that, it's always very nice for our healing, these live webinars, to start to bring together a sort of coherent, harmonious resonance within the collective of our group in real time. And if you're watching this webinar later, you're part of that. What is time? Time is the interface between the human nervous system and the whole flow of creation, the whole of creation. Our nervous systems break it down, so experience it like a sequential unfoldment, time. So right there, we're kind of looking, we're going in already with the awareness and starting to look at some of the finer areas where the way our human nervous systems perceive and experience the energy healing process versus what's actually happening, which is the wholeness. That was good. That was good. There was a shift right there. The wholeness of everyone's being. So right now I'm looking out into the collective of our group, and I'm just seeing everyone as a great field of life force. Before I looked out and I was like getting reads on individual physiologies like that. But now it's like everybody's field of their life force, the field of themselves that they are, that energy structure of self. Beautiful, beautiful. So as the attention starts to shift over from thinking of ourselves as a body with a name and a job or a title of some kind, mother or teacher or whatever, thinking more in terms of ourselves as just a field of self, field of amness. Very nice. And from that level, it's a lovely harmony and coherence among the whole group. The whole group is very gels. So good job, everybody. Nice shift, everybody. And now the shift, the nature of that shift is offered back to the field of pure, unbounded silence. Because the field, the source of creation, the field of unbounded silence, it takes whatever you give it, which is life supporting, whatever you give it, which is life supporting, and multiplies it to infinity. So that's happening. So we're just feeling that initial impulse of shifting over from being, I'm a body with a name, with a title, into I'm a field of being. And then that transformation or shift multiplies to infinity. When it's multiplying to infinity, I'm seeing this process as very delicate, very, very tender, that when the shift goes into the field of being, it becomes very, very soft. And I love that because it ties into today's theme, which is manifesting, that the principle is that which is closest to the truth lasts the longest. So whatever we produce, whatever impulse of intelligence or creativity or intention, desire that we produce, which is closer to truth, like absolute truth, closer to the form of that which is formless, the longer it lasts. Very good. It's very important. It's very important. So I'm just looking at that. So it's like very, very close, very delicate toward the origins of all things. This little loop of shift from more of an isolated identification of self to more of an unbounded, expanded identification of self. Beautiful. So that feels really soft and really nice. Good job, everybody. Okay, now I notice the questions come in. I just want to let everybody know that I will answer questions, but a little closer to the end of the session, because it's nice when the healings get flowing to just let them roll without making a break in the process. But thank you. I really appreciate questions. So thank you to the person who's already sent a question in, and please feel free, anybody, to ask any others that you'd like. If you guys would like to ask questions, maybe some paper and pencil could be provided for people down here, if that happens. Thank you. All right. So the idea of karmic blocks, which is the theme, melting the karmic blocks, which are in the way of manifesting whatever we want. For a long time, those of you who've been with me for a long time know that I talk about that which is at the foundation of, that's kind of like behind suffering, as being karma. However, if we look at karma and we get a little bit deeper than that, what we find is ignorance is behind karma. Because, and thank you to one of our webinar participants for coming into a discourse with me about that and helping me dig down to a deeper level with that. I'm so grateful. So yeah, the point is that karma is action, and karma, as when we talk about karma that gives rise to suffering, that would be the return of past actions which were based on ignorance, basically. So I was looking at that ignorance and I was thinking, okay, so, oh yeah, so here's paper and pencil for people who want to ask questions. If anybody wants to at any point. Good. Ooh, let's get all covered up here. Okay, so past actions. In order to understand how a person could perform an action which is based on ignorance rather than knowledge. I mean, how many people start their day going, well, I hope I'll do some actions based on ignorance today. Yeah, right? It's like, really? Like, nobody wants to do that. If we have a, you know, if we're performing action based on ignorance, it's got to be because it's happening kind of spontaneously. It's sort of going covertly. It's coming out, you know, under the covers in a way that, you know, we don't really realize like what we actually did. So we need to look at this a little bit in order to identify or define exactly how we're going to recognize these karmas way before they actually manifest up to the surface, right? The idea is here you want to catch stuff early when it's still in its seed form or its root. You want to catch it at the root, and you want to extract it from the root position so that it never actually turns into anything horrible. So that's one thing, is so we can identify. The other thing is so that we don't do it again. Two things. We don't want to continue doing action based on ignorance, and we want to be able to identify what are those features or qualities of that karma at an early stage. All right, so we need to look a little bit at like, how does this all form? This is the theoretical part, everybody, so just bear with me, and then we'll go back into some more healing. But you have to realize this has been brewing for me for a couple of weeks, and I really couldn't wait to share it with you. So thanks for being with me. All right. When we're talking about manifesting anything, good karma, bad karma, indifferent karma, whatever kind of karma we're manifesting, everything starts, the word manifesting kind of takes into account that we're starting with something that isn't, and we're going to something that is, right? Simple. Start with something that isn't, and then go to something that is. So unbounded, unmanifest quality-less being the source of everything. And then somehow that unbounded, unmanifest quality-less being becomes. All right, so at the first, very, very first, deepest stages of that process, that quality-less unmanifest being hasn't even become something yet, but it does this little thing where it does a little fold on itself. It goes, whoop. And what happens is, instead of being just quality-less being asleep, it like wakes up to its nature and it goes, oh, I think I'm something. Like it hasn't become something completely yet, but it's like, oh, I know that I exist. I know that I exist. Okay, so that little turn gives rise to differentiation. Even though it's at a level of creation which is quality-less, which can't actually be differentiated, it happens deep in there. The waking up starts. The waking up starts. One thing understands itself. And as soon as it understands itself, understanding exists. Something who is understanding exists, and something which is being understood exists. So it understands itself. From that understanding, these aspects of the process of understanding and that which understands and that which is understood, those start to look at each other. They start to fold back on each other again, and layers start to bubble and build up in that unmanifest field of being. And as that happens, as those layers start to curl in on each other, some little friction is created. And that little friction gives rise to a emergence into the material level of creation. By the time the friction bursts forth to the very deepest level of manifestation, already there's some kind of balance, because each little folding, each little cycle of folding creates a relationship with every other cycle of folding. And we need to really talk about relationships tonight. This is important, because the key, I feel the key to clearing these blockages of karma is understanding our relationship with karma and with the process of manifesting and with the features of the finest relative level of our physiologies. We need to understand that the key to having an evolutionary effect on this manifesting process, because manifestation is happening everywhere all the time, right? So, but the key to having the effect, like an actual grounded effect that actually does something, is about relationship. It's about relationship. It's about connection. So, all right. I'm just going to look into, I'm going to enjoy being with our field of everybody and everything. And one of the things that's happening, because we're going back into another healing, we have to do lots of healings, and we'll come back to more theory in a few minutes. For those, I know you're loving the theory. Oh, no, sorry. I love the theory. I enjoy it. But anyway, we back into the field of our collective and everybody's self, now that we've kind of established that energetic structure of self. Now what we're looking at is the astral level of everyone's physiology. And as I've described before in previous webinars, the deal with the astral body and the astral field, first of all, everyone has an astral body, and then the astral body resides in the astral field. And the astral field is sometimes known as the web of life. Sometimes I use that word to describe the astral field, because at the astral level of creation, you've got your finest level of feeling, where things aren't very well defined, but then the astral level is just one layer above that. It's still collective, but it's threads and threads and threads and threads and streams and rivers and, you know, beams of consciousness, beams of light, beams of consciousness. And at that level, there's a tremendous sorting that takes place. Lots of defining, and It's as if it's almost, the web of life is almost like a kind of testing ground. What happens is a lot of, from the source of the infinite resource of unmanifest being comes massive amounts of creative intelligence and energy and being, and it gets up to the astral level, and then there starts to be a lot of sorting goes on. At the causal level, at the finest material level, it's a little bit like everything's accepted. Just everything is allowed and adored, and the dark and the light and everything's there. Everything's at that level. There's that saying, Brahman devours everything. So at the causal level, that finest level of feeling, we kind of have the whole, pretty much the whole ball of wax. But then at the astral level, just a hair more manifest, we start to get a lot of, there's like a kind of a churning through those beams or streams of consciousness. I was just looking at the astral field this morning, and I noticed these impulses of energy that run through the astral field, this continuous flow of like a pulsing of consciousness through the astral field. And what that does is it starts to make order out of all this profusion of intentions and ideas and everything. Like if you think, and I know I've given this example before, you think, I'm going to go to the store. Immediately, like a little beam of intelligence goes from you to the store. Already you haven't even gotten there yet. And so now it may happen, because we're talking about manifesting, right? It may happen that that little idea, I'm going to go to the store. Like I had, actually, this happened today. Ha, ironically, joke's on me. Okay, so I thought, I'm going to go to the store. So I went to the store, and I drove around the parking lot like 3 times and couldn't find a parking space. And I said to myself, I need to get ready for a webinar. The store is obviously rife with people. If I go in now, I'm probably not going to get out for an hour. So I turned around and I didn't go to the store. The intention was there, but somehow it got stopped. Right? It got stopped before it got a chance to manifest. So sometimes you have an idea, I'm going to go to the store, whoop, beam goes to the store, and then it doesn't happen. But probably 9 times out of 10, it does happen. So these beams of intention or desire or ideas are bursting forward from the source of creation all the time. And then they get up to the astral level, and then what happens is there's this interface between a specific intention or a specific idea. It's got to fit itself into the web of life. And if the web of life supports, bingo, you're at the store, no problem. And if it doesn't, you end up somewhere else. So hopefully someplace nice like home. Anyway. So what makes the difference? What makes a difference, and why is it that some ideas or some impulses of creative intelligence will come up from the source of creation and give rise to something completely unpleasant, like an illness? You know, can you say, we say, well, you know, if that impulse is closer, what did I say earlier? That which is closest to the truth lasts the longest, right? So an impulse comes up, and you'd say, well, if it's close to the truth, it's more likely to get support from the web of life and to come up to the surface. But then the question is, well, then why do things happen that are like not very nice, like getting sick? Answer, and I'm just asking it in the holy presence of everyone here. Because I can ask these questions on my own, but let me tell you, in your presence, the answers are so much richer. So even at the web of life level, we have the whole spectrum of dark to light. And well, at all levels, even at the physical material level, we have the spectrum of dark to light. So we know that that spectrum is there. But sometimes an impulse comes up and it sort of catches in with, if it's, say, an impulse that's going to give rise to some problems for the physiology, then it catches in with some aspect that's in the web of life that is allowing that, which is all the little factors are going together. Like if anybody's had that experience where you kind of thought you were fighting something and you weren't feeling great. And then just by chance, you happened to have gone outside and gotten extra cold. And then you came home and your feet and your nose were cold. And then that just contributed to a cold coming on, something like that. It happens, you know, like it could have been, that could have worked out a different way. We need to get down into more of a hair splitting area because I'm seeing the field of everybody here, and I'm seeing that lovely sorting which is taking place in the astral level of the physiology. And this is like kind of a new thing that I hadn't really noticed as much before, and I love it. In that sorting of that which is going to come out to the surface and become a physical manifestation, that which is going to fold back into the field of silence and not ever be seen again. In that sorting process, the question is, what makes the difference between one which is going to come forward and one which is not, an impulse of intention, right, or idea, and one which is not? Each one, each intention, each impulse of intelligence carries with it a particular, you could call it an energy signature, that it carries with it from its emergence from the source of creation. Okay, that's good. That's a piece of information we can use. Okay, so let's go down and look at the impulses as they emerge from the source of creation and see what's going on there. What I'm seeing is that in the emergence, okay, this is interesting. The first level of emergence of everything seems to come out, and I think you guys wouldn't be seeing this if it weren't for you. Thank you. Seems to come out as a kind of, I would say, an expression of primordial light. So Agni, we can say Agni, which is the first light, the primordial light. But each impulse, like each, Agni is also known as like a kind of fire, like a very abstract fire at an abstract level, like the energy of fire, behind fire. And behind the Agni is, behind each impulse of it is a mixture of the way that unmanifest being was folding on itself before it came out. And that the way it folds on itself, it can fold on itself many, many different ways, and it has to get up to a certain number of layers of folds before it emerges. So in that layering process, it can layer more or less favoring like the experiencer, or it can layer up more or less favoring the process of experiencing, or it can layer up favoring more or less the experience. Does that make sense? We've got experience-ness, we've got am-ness, being-ness, and it's looking at its own nature. And when it does that, it divides to those three parts, right? The knower, the known, and the process, the knower, the known, and the process of knowing, like that. So sometimes what happens is these parts start to look at each other, and as they do that, they start to make layers. So these two will look at each other and they make a layer, and then they look at this part over here and that makes a layer of three, and then all of them look back at the knower again and that makes another layer like that. So layers and layers and layers. And so each time an impulse of this first fire emerges, it has behind it a certain mix of layers of unmanifest being folded on its own nature in various ways, infinite ways, infinite ways. Already, that means already as soon as the impulse arises, before it's even become anything, it's already marked. It's already marked as being more on the flavor of the knower, more on the flavor of the process of knowing, more on the flavor of the process of the known. And that will cause that fire to interact with the web of the field of consciousness. Oh, yeah, okay, this is good. I'm getting a download. I'm getting a download, hoping for everyone also here to receive this. They come out with different flavors. And it first starts as just the primordial fire, so it's a very pure form. Okay. So one of the things is that if the impulses behind the fire. We can't see those impulses with senses. We can't even really know them, but we can see the fire. We can see at the very finest level of the manifest, we can start to perceive and understand and define and identify. So at that level, the fire has, you can say it has different flavors. And okay, oh, the download is continuing. So what we're looking at here is information coming in right now to help us define how these first forms arise at the causal level of creation, so that we understand which ones are more likely to manifest to the surface and which ones aren't. And as you've heard me mention before in previous webinars, one of the things that determines whether a karma is like a good karma or a bad karma has to do with whether it, when it's sitting down at that finest level of manifestation, whether it blocks the flow of consciousness or whether it allows the flow of consciousness. Oh, just before I said that, I had another piece of information that was just a brand new piece. I really appreciate this, you guys, because I'm getting a chance to also get new information. God bless you all. So, yes, ignorance. Ignorance. So what is ignorance? Ignorance is, when I was looking deep into ignorance, what I noticed is that all ignorance, when it kind of gets taken back to its source, like what is the seed of ignorance? What is the source of ignorance? The source of ignorance is separation, or it's that feeling of being not unified with the rest of creation, not unified with the divine. That's the source of ignorance. So we can see how that can give rise to actions that are, that ultimately could come back in a form that wasn't very nice, right? Like if we think, well, I'm here and that animal's over there and it's separate from me, so I'm going to go get it and kill it or whatever. Whatever. I mean, I do a lot of looking on Google Maps because of my work. I have to, well, back in the days, like caveman days, I'm getting a look from the audience like, was that an example? Like back in the caveman days, people are like, I gotta survive, right? So I'm separate from the animal dies, I live. But anyway, I do a lot of looking on Google Maps. And what I've noticed is very interesting is that there are quarries or strip mines near every major city and many around even the small cities of our earth. And they look like wounds on the face of the earth. And of course, it makes sense that if humans move into an area, they're like, we need to build buildings, we need infrastructure, we need some gravel to make some roads. So let's go over there, like outside of our city limits, and we're going to find some spot, and we're going to start digging and pull up the rocks and crush them up and make them into roads and put them in our buildings and so forth. Great, great. Except that if you've ever looked at Mother Earth from Google Maps, from up above, you see how beautiful she is. And you see that this exquisite living thing that we're living on is this beautiful living being that's full of life force and intelligence and has formed herself so amazingly, exquisitely, beautifully. So what they do is they go and they go, okay, that mountain right there, it's a goner. We're going to take that one out. We're going to make it into roads. And so, right? And there's not the awareness of the intelligence in all things is broken at that spot. There's a break. And there's been a tendency over the course of time for humanity to feel a bit of separation from its own divine roots, from the rest of nature, from nature. And it's that separation that makes a person feel like, well, that's right action, right? We'll just go rip down that mountain, and we need to do that. That's important. There are ways to live without ripping down mountains. In fact, a lot of our ancestors were doing it for centuries upon hundreds of thousands of years. Didn't rip down a single mountain for 100,000 years. So anyway, the sense of separation does it. And the sense of separation is born as soon as that 3-in-1 flow starts to come out into the finest relative level of creation. And those structures that come out that are more Chundas born, that are more the object of observation born, they resonate better with the relative level of creation. So those are the ones that are, in a sense, have more supportive nature to make it up to the surface. Because they naturally, the word Chundas, I use the word Chundas, which is a Sanskrit word, which also means meter. So it's kind of like there's a pulse in there. There's a pulse or an impulse in that. And that's that quality of the known, right? We have the knower, process of knowing, and known. So the known has a kind of a pulse in it. And that actually helps it come to the surface more. So the known, what that does is it creates this illusion of separation. So the solution is union. So we've got all these fine impulses of interaction of very, very fine fabrics of consciousness going on at the deepest level of our field of self. And how do we put our attention on them in such a way as to promote highest evolution, improved health, improved wealth, more friends, everything that's good in life, fulfillment of desires, whatever your desire is, whatever your desire is? The answer is union. We create a relationship with these forms that are in this fine level of our own field of self. So that's also a curving of the knower back onto the known, right? Up till now, we've got the knower, known, and the process of knowing going on deep inside before anything manifests. But now we're going to take that principle and in energy healing, turn it around and actually apply it at a relative level of experience. The beauty of those three parts looking at each other is that they create wholeness. When they look at each other, they know themselves to be one thing. So anytime we turn our awareness back around and start looking in at these fine levels of the structure of self, we create wholeness. We're using our awareness to reestablish connection to infinite self. Okay. So I talked about how some forms come out and they block the flow of consciousness, and other forms come out and they allow consciousness to continue moving through. And again, this is where I'm appreciating that we're doing this as a collective, because I get a much broader perspective on these really difficult questions when I'm with you. Thank you, everybody. I promised we would do some clearing of karmic blocks. So actions from the past that were based on ignorance, based on separation, sense of separation of self from wholeness. And what I'm feeling is the most tremendously sweet love. Just a sweet connection. It's a nice impulse of the heart. And I've been feeling all along as I've been cluing into the collective, how there's just such a beautiful impulse from the heart, such beautiful hearts in this collective, in our collective. This impulse from the heart goes into those spaces or into those, I want to call them particles of memory, but they go into those little pockets of past experience. So places where there are impressions. And this softness and acceptance is going there. If something's blocking the flow, we need to bring in something that flows. And emotion flows. In the body, emotion is represented by water. So the flow of water, anytime you have issues with water, if anybody ever had a pipe burst in their house or a flood or something, yeah, that's always an indication that something's going on emotionally with self, using inference. So that there's that there's like a water energy coming in. And it's coming in with that flow of heart value, the softness, the sweetness, the love. It adds richness and meaning to that flow. And right now I'm experiencing it. Let me just check where it's landing. Other than that, it's going into the part of self, the astral level of self, where all those beams are, connects each one of us to all the parts of ourself. Like those beams connect us. They connect us to our ancestors. They connect us to past experiences, past incarnations, etc. So there in the web of life, it's as if our collective is producing an impulse of sweetness, which is moving into the web of life and is increasing the value of softness, of flow, of safety. It's increasing the flow of safety so that there's that sense of wherever we move from here, we're okay. Like we're covered. Backs are covered. Sometimes that happens when we're going to go somewhere scary. So I'll see what happens. But right now what's happening is if the flow is moving into not just for everybody in this group personally, but it's moving into the web of life. So it's connecting with people all through our earth and definitely connecting with ancestors. I can feel that ancestral archive liveliness in that. I can feel the mountains, which have also been with us. I mean, so the intelligence, the earth intelligence. So those Davic intelligences of earth, which are responsible for the formation of our beautiful planet. Also receiving this softening. I suppose you can say, well, everything that happens because that's what had the support of nature to happen. So if it looks at first like you tear down a mountain, right? It's like, oh, you shouldn't have torn down a mountain. But the thing is, the thing is that if the mountain comes down, then that's what was supposed to happen at that time. That's what had the support of nature to happen. There was more support of nature for it to come down than there was for it to stay up. So it came down. So when that happens, it means that there's some energy there that was responsible for the crumbling down, responsible for the breaking down of something which had the fate of transforming to something else. And ultimately, those things which last the longest, remember I said, are closest to the truth. Those are the things that are uncorrupted. Uncorrupted. And that brings us to this form. This is the ancestors asking me a question right now, just saying. They're asking, yeah, but what about the innocent? What about when somebody really innocent gets hurt? Or somebody who really was good, and, you know, how do you explain, like what that's the kind of dark energy. Or even somebody, those of us in the group who have concerns or illnesses. Like, I was good, you know, I've been like taking care of people all my life and doing my job in this world, and then I got sick. How did that work out? Why did that happen? The answer is some attachment to the forms which keep one bound to separation, like egoic forms, for example. So there, egoic forms. Ego can be found in the causal field. Ego can be found anywhere along that spectrum of dense to subtle, or from the spectrum of dark to light, or from the spectrum of big to small. Any pair of opposites provides us with an axis to navigate the ocean of consciousness. But in this case, we're talking about that finest level of feeling of self. So right there in the finest level, what's happening is that that flow of sweetness that first emerged in the beginning of this section of the healing is now illuminating, like lighting up little spots where there's some ego. So before, it was illuminating spots where ignorance had crept in, or the feeling of separation had crept in and given rise to an action that then reverberates as negative karma through the ages. But now underneath that, see, we're like peeling off the layers of an onion skin. Underneath that is ego, individual ego, sense of like, yeah, but I'm me and I'm here and I'm separate from all you guys. The body is part of the collective body of Earth, right? It kind of appears separate, but it isn't. We're all points of contact on that same field of divinity. We're antennas looking up, folding back on, a consciousness folds back on its own nature to know. So the individual ego, and where I'm feeling the individual ego is in the cord of light. So now we're feeling back through the ages and through the ancestral field. Remember, the ancestors asked this question. So we're feeling back, and I'm feeling it in the part of the cord of light that's up in this area. So it's from about here, like about this part of my necklace right here, up to around the Ajna chakra area. So from the throat area up to this area, or I'd say the 4.5. The 4.5 is called the wish-fulfilling tree. That's where desire, right? That's one of the spots of desire in the body. Right there. Oh, and didn't we start out this thing talking about how it's those impulses that come out from the source of creation are like little desires, right? So the desire is like that little impulse of desire, giving rise to a sense of my desire, my thing that I want. Right there, I see you, I see it. Okay, good. I think we've got this thing isolated now. Now, my awareness has isolated this form, which is sitting in the causal level of creation. And it's a kind of a karma, and it's associated with egoic form, so identification and personality and intellect and small self and small I, and there's another one. There's 6 of them. Anyway, mostly, you get the idea. Oh, ego, of course. Anyway, so we've got these forms that are there that are kind of, they're like the constituents of this form that's sitting in the causal field. And it is held, it's like an archetypal form because it's held in common by people everywhere. All people have experienced it at some point or another. We've experienced that sense of mine. Remember, I used to teach school, and there's up to a certain grade in school, everybody wants to be first. Like you say, okay, we're going to go outside, everybody, we're going to line up in line. Oh, can I be first? They all want to be first. And then it's the next thing that you do. Okay, everybody, we're going to do a craft project. Now I'm going to pass out these crayons here. Oh, can I get them first? And everybody in the class doesn't understand why they aren't first, or why they can't they all be first? They just all want to be first. Turns out, when you get outside, you are first outside. That's your first outside. Even if Joey got outside a few minutes before you did, once you get there, that's your first outside. Once you get your crayon, you're the first one to get that crayon. So it's really hard for little kids to wrap their minds around that. It's not hard for you. And so what we're doing is we're going back into the junction, into the nervous system. We're looking into like the fine mechanics of how the nervous system is formed, because it's partly, a lot of this situation of ignorance is a byproduct of the actual construct of the human nervous system, which has limitations. And our senses of perception have limitations. So we want to go in there and find that spot where infinity meets the nervous system. And that's where that karma is sitting. That's where the ego is sitting. Like I was feeling it in here, but I was feeling it in the cord of light, right? Like not in the physical nervous system, but in the energy structure of the self. Cord of light, ancient structure of the universe, ancient structure of the universe, grounded in infinity at both ends, coming in the crown of the head, running down through the whole body, down into the core of the earth, connecting up with Earth's cords, which connect up with the planets and the stars and the center of the galaxy, and from the center of the galaxy to the center sun, and so forth. So we've got infinity, the infinity of the manifest field of creation in one direction, and infinity of unmanifest creation out the crown of the head in the other direction. That's the cord of light. Older than the physical body, and one of the structuring, the primary structuring, primary structurer of the body. The primary structurer of the body. Because the body starts as a seed, right? And then becomes hollow. And already there's space for a cord right there, and pretty soon it becomes a tube. So the body actually forms around that cord of light. The cord of light comes in first. Okay, getting a whole download about mothers and birthing and gestation and all that, but maybe we don't need to go into all that tonight. But that's a whole nother area, a very interesting area coming in. I feel like I want to let that simmer a little bit as we come back to the healing. So in the cord of light, clearing egoic structures, particularly the cord of light area from here to here, and also for ancestors going back multiple generations. I can count, looks like 12 generations. 12 generations for everybody? Like really, for everybody it's exactly the same? No, it can be variance. There are variances. But we're also looking into the collective of our world right now. And so in the collective, there are those individuals who may never see this video, who are receiving this healing as well. What is drawing in the collective into this healing is a very sincere, deep-seated desire for union. That's why we keep coming back again. Back and back is to go into that state of union, that state of oneness, wholeness, the whole universe. Looking at the universe from a human nervous system, it looks a certain way. Looking at the universe from a fish nervous system, it looks completely different. So we want that union from this perspective at this time. So right there, looking again where the rubber meets the road, we're looking into, for all of us in this healing session, and anybody who watches this video in the future, we're looking into the actual construct of the physical nervous system to see where the energy, the healing or transformative energy of that Agni, remember that fire transforms, that transformative energy moves into the physical nervous system and promotes structure, orderly structure, which allows these physical nervous systems to integrate wholeness more completely, refinement of senses, sensory perception. I'm seeing a spot. It's way at the back of the brain. Looks like it's in the, I was going to say reticular activating system, but it actually looks like it's in the cerebellum. It's in the cerebellum. So that area is directly receiving our attention at this time, and it's as if you're receiving a download directly into the cerebellum. One of the things the cerebellum does is it sorts and filters information. So the organ that's responsible for filtering information is now getting an upgrade to allow the filtration process to embrace or include experiences, sensations, impressions, which are associated with wholeness. I was going to say sattva, which means purity. I haven't really talked much about the three gunas tonight, and I didn't want to get too Vedic on it. I have to be very careful because I love you all and I want to honor everybody who doesn't have a Vedic science background, because I value your presence here and I don't want to use too many confusing terms, but the relative field of creation in Vedic science is considered to be the play of these three values, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And tamas is the kind of destructive value. Sattva is the creative value, the very pure. The word sattva is associated with the word pure or purity. And rajasic is kind of like, it's like the Energizer Bunny. It kind of just keeps churning and churning and churning that field. I hope I'm about correct, because I've got Vedic scientists out in my audience right here. You can let me know later if I'm correct or not on that account, and if I need to reconstruct tomorrow, I will. But that's my it's a basic understanding. That which dissolves, that which keeps everything kind of going back and forth, and that which dissolves, that which creates, and that which kind of keeps it going back and forth between dissolution and creation. So that purity value, the sattva value is establishing in the cerebellum, because the source of creation is ultimately absolutely pure. So remember, that which is closest to the truth lasts the longest. This is a webinar about manifestation, and I know I haven't talked hugely about actually manifesting here, but usually Friday's the setup for Saturday anyway, so we'll see how things go tomorrow on that account, because it's almost question time as well, and I see questions coming in. However, that which is closest to the truth lasts the longest. So we want our brains to last a long time and be very healthy. So what's happening is some of the filtration system that supports the way neural connections are formed and the way we analyze and synthesize our experience are being aligned with purity. That allows, and there's definitely refinement of the senses of perception taking place as well right now. And I'm also seeing clearing of channels between each of the sensory cortices and the pineal gland. That's good, I think. I'm just seeing it. Oh, I guess we'll find out. And then pineal gland's an important thing. It helps us wake up and go to sleep and dream and stuff. That's good to have that. Good sleep is good. Those channels clearing. Those channels clearing. So there's a kind of a synthesis that takes place in and around the pineal gland. I'm also seeing what looks like a matrix of purity that's forming around the pineal gland. So that's very nice. That's got to be good, right? Matrix of purity. A matrix of purity. Yes, that will support health of that organ. Evidently, it's necessary in order to, of course it's necessary, in order to interface with the work that's being done in the cerebellum, because the cerebellum is in the area of the brain known as the reticular activating system, which creates the initial impulse that causes the pineal gland to either produce melatonin to put you to sleep or serotonin to wake you up. Or does it interface with the DMT? I don't think so. Dimethyltryptophan? I don't think so. At least I didn't learn that it did in my brain class. That would be a question for Dr. Travis. Anyway, yeah. So that's a connection being made between the cerebellum at the very back of the head and the pineal gland, which is right in the middle of the head. Thank you. And I'm seeing for everybody, that channel from the pineal gland right out the front of the head is just opening wide up, opening up for everybody. Good job, everybody. Good job. Beaming those little beams of intention out. So this work that we're doing, clearing the ego, clearing the impressions from past experiences of making mistakes, if you want to call it that. Not sure there's anything that's really a mistake, but maybe we need to go into that later. That's giving rise to a big restructuring, rewiring of the brain area. Well, beautiful. So now I'd like to ask everyone's brains if they could please check in with the heart and see how the restructuring of the brain supports and interfaces in a harmonious manner with the seat of feeling of self, the finest level of feeling of self in the heart area. So we're just going to look at that connection. It's important because the magnetic field produced by the brain is 60 times less powerful than the magnetic field produced by the heart. So you always want to check in with the boss. What I'm seeing in the heart areas, and this is particularly for the ancestors, is a beautiful lightning. Just a beautiful, I'm realizing that the ancestors for a long time have held or carried, a lot of them have carried grief, they've carried despair, all kinds of discordant feelings here in the heart marma area, this big energy center of the chest. These feelings have caused a kind of a dampening down of people's ability to manifest. And they also have given rise to structures, karmic structures. They've given rise to ignorance, right? When that energy, when they're dense, sort of darker energies that are entertained or kind of held in the chest, they don't get a chance to come out and to do their job, which is to transform, okay? So remember, there's the destructive energy and the creative energy. What those denser energies do is they show us where change is required. So when they get dampened down and a cap gets put on them like that, then what happens is it starts to take a lot of energy to just deal with that. Like that feeling is there and it's not going anywhere. So the ancestors are receiving this release of all these denser energies in the heart. And I'm telling you, in most cases, the ancestors were adorable. You know, I mean, they were only doing it because they didn't want to hurt somebody's feelings or something. I don't know. They lost a loved one and they felt like it was hopeless. You know, people lost a lot of children back in the day. That must have been really hard, right? It's a lot of time and trouble to make a child and lose them. It's no fun. So that process of lightening up the hearts, and I'm just feeling it and I'm feeling it and I'm feeling it, and I'm noticing that the energy is kind of going back and forth to the front to the back of the body a little bit. And it's going back into the heart area behind the body. So it's kind of moving. There's like a little wave moving back and forth in this energy center that's like washing. It's washing. And this is the use of tamas. This is the use of the destructive energies of creation for evolutionary purpose, right? What are we destroying? We're washing out. Before we were washing out ego, now we're washing out these denser feelings that can get somehow stuck in. They start to mold the way this part of the body functions. And then, of course, the feeling that's sitting there is the foundation for the beating of the heart, right? Which is producing that magnetic field. So the heart's beating like this. But if you're scared, the heart beats like this, right? And if you're angry, the heart beats like really sporadically. And so whatever the feeling is going on here is going to tell the heart how to beat. And how the heart beats produces a physically measurable magnetic field that's 60 times more powerful than the magnetic field produced by the brain, and is like the conductor of the orchestra of the body, because it is by far the most powerful of all the organs of the body. So whatever magnetic field, it's actually measurable like 3 feet outside your body. So out to the tips of your fingers, you can still measure the magnetic field produced by the heart. So what that means is that then influences the immune system and the respiratory system and the lymphatic system and the digestive system and the nervous system. we're manifesting health, and we're doing it at the level of DNA. Because anytime we're working with the ancestors, we are literally working with DNA. This is your DNA is your ancestral archive. Okay, guys, I can tell some cool questions have come in, and I need to answer. I could keep going, but I'll get to keep going tomorrow morning. That's why we do these twice. We do the setup tonight. We'll do the bring it home tomorrow. But we've got some questions, so I'd like to look at the questions and see what we've got here. So one lady's saying, it's just a technical question. She's occasionally getting frames freezing for a couple of seconds, and then it flows again normally. Oh, other people are also having that? So is that bandwidth situation going on? My question to my technical advisor is, is that having to do with bandwidth from our end, or is it having to do with bandwidth from other people's end? Because if it has to do from our end, then we need to do something about that. If it has to do with you guys, I can't do anything. I can't do anything about it. Sorry. But so we will work that one out. I'm sorry about that a few people were having that problem. Oh, I'm also getting other people saying that they're not having a problem. There are quite a few people that are not having any freezing. Okay, so it's possible that it has to do with bandwidth at the end that's receiving the webinar transmission. Okay, so anyway, but we'll check from our side too, because there's no reason why we can't have enough bandwidth to accommodate at least the flow of the webinar to you guys. Okay, here's a lady. I love this lady. She's an energy healer. She says, I feel a conflict within the creative impulse itself. In other words, if one wants to communicate greatest benefit to the greatest number of individuals, is it better to project a personal desire or hope for manifestation of a communal need? And how do we discern the difference at such a subtle level? That's a really great question. Oh yeah, I see that people here, they're going, oh man, what a great question. Great question. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to keep my question close here. I've got this new light, as I mentioned, so my question box is going to be, I got to rearrange my desktop a little bit so I can see everything. All right, so that desire, I'm going to use an example from history, okay? There was a time earlier in our century, in the last century, when there was this desire for advancement of technology. And it seemed like a great desire, right? Because, I mean, obviously we've played with that desire quite a bit over the last, say, 80 years, 80 to 100 years. We played with this desire for the advancement of technology. And the result has been a lot of nice, oh, the webinar, how about that? That wouldn't have happened otherwise. So that was a desire, and it seemed like a really good, important desire for the well-being of mankind. But if we go back about 80 or 90 years, what we find is there was another desire that came coupled up next door neighbor to that desire. And that was that there was an impulse there to kind of favor certain types of development, but not really recognize or favor moral development. At that time, there was an increase in technology, but there was almost like a holding back or a retardation of moral evolution and development. And as we all know, as great as technology is, if you get technology out of control without compassion behind it, you get atom bombs, which is what we got out of that. And that wasn't such a great thing. So what I'd like to offer forward, and then, okay, and let me just say that that was happening. And that was so scary to the soul and the heart of mankind that like a whole generation of people came to Earth to kind of like self-sacrifice in order to try to shift that balance around. And that's what the huge, massive sacrifices, the two big ones were the Bolshevik Revolution and the World War II that happened in the last century, that were so massive and so heart-wrenching that they forced the moral development back up to the surface. It was an out of balance. There was something out of balance there. So the reason I'm bringing this up as an example for this question is because a lot of the desires that are issued forth for the sake of the collective are often coming from several points simultaneously. For example, the desire for all of us to be a little more in tune with nature, right? That's something that our culture has kind of gotten a little bit separated from, and there's a big collective desire that's rising. It's rising up through our collective, and some people are really feeling it, and they go into the field of sustainable living. Like, I'm going to study how to, be more sustainable, and other people maybe not as much. Maybe they go into business or something like that. But they're feeling it. Everybody's feeling it. Everybody's feeling it to some degree. So, oh, thank you. Thank you so much. So when a desire rises in any one of us for some great good, the greatest amount of good, the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people, it's very likely that the same desire is rising in other areas at the same time. And certainly in our healing collective, this happens all the time. Like, that's kind of one of the principal themes of these live webinars, is that as a collective, we're very powerful to produce impulses of transformation for the collective consciousness. As we've been, for example, doing these healings for all our ancestors, that's going to come forward in time, and it's going to touch your cousins and your aunts and your uncles, and it goes back from each one of us like that, but then it comes forward like that. So it's sort of issuing forth from this work that we're doing. So the thing to know is that, yes, your second part, how do we discern the difference at a subtle level between what is a personal desire and what is me just sort of cluing into, any one of us cluing into a desire which is held at a collective level of humanity in the web of life, basically, that we're just picking it up from the web of life? The answer is that all desires and all feelings, every desire starts as a feeling, right? That the source of all feeling is bliss. And so ultimately, it's the Creator desiring through you. It's divinity using you as the instrument. And so we don't have to discern too much of a difference at that level, because, oh, you guys have to see how beautiful my necklace is. Wait a minute, it's sliding. There we go. There's more of it. Look at that. Oh, that's so beautiful, right? Anyway, yeah, there's this discernment of being wants to perpetuate itself in the most pure and essential manner. It wants itself, being wants itself to come out to this three-dimensional relative level of creation where there are all these boundaries based on the fact that our nervous systems have these limitations. And yet, in spite of the limitations, it wants to bust through the limitations to still manifest itself in a way which is so pure and so beautiful and so perfect. And so that's where that's kind of like the seed of the bliss. And the bliss is behind the emotion, even the negative emotions. So how to discern the difference at such a subtle level? You don't have to. At the subtle level, it's possible. And this I didn't get into tonight, and I think I'm probably going to have to get into it tomorrow. Remember earlier I talked about relationship is one of the key players or the key factors? How do we form our relationship with being? How do we form? Oh, thanks, Richard. Hey, thanks. How do we form a relationship with those structures at the subtlest level of ourself, those karmic structures, so that they end up promoting our evolution, promoting evolution for everyone rather than detracting from it. Okay, I see we're already at our hour, so I want to talk about this. Discuss the value of illness for strengthening the soul, for the ancestors and the collective also possibly. Some people in person, let's see, some people in, and then I'm not quite reading the next word, in present lifetime will not understand this value of wholeness. Can the rest of us blast through this? Right. Right. So the deal is, yes, thank you. So the deal is that the illness will come along. Oh, I love this about the human body. Oh, and there's a bunch more questions coming, you guys. We're at our hour and there's a bunch more questions. Okay, so here's what we're going to have to do. I would like to take down the questions, and I'd like to work with some of these questions tomorrow because we're at our hour. But let me answer at least this last one before we sign off for the night. So every single part of the human body expresses divinity in its own unique way from its own unique angle, just like each one of us is an expression of divinity from our unique angle. But we're still all just having a human experience. So the illness will come on a particular part of the body, and because that part of the body is a particular facet of the expression of divinity. So by understanding the connection of each part of the body to its own divine source, then we can do an analysis. I almost always start with inference, because each part of the body has a different role to play in creation. Our hands are where we manipulate the world. If something happens to your hands, it means there's some little problem. There's some area of you, there's some area of self which is not interfacing with the physical material field in a way which is fully satisfying the soul. It's not satisfying the desire, the bliss of being. So somehow there's something that's missed right there. So the illnesses, the value of illness is that it shows you the angle with which to dive into the field of your own divinity. It shows you like the point of like where to place your diving board, kind of. If you're diving off of something going on with the hand, or you're diving off of something going on with, say, the respiratory system or the ears or the nervous system or whichever part it is, that from that angle there's some aspect which has manifested to the surface and is now not useful, is now clearly not fully honoring its source, which is divine being. So that something has to break down there, and so that's what illness does, is it kind of breaks down some aspect of self. It breaks down the system to a certain degree, and then it allows a resetting, so that then the system resets itself in alignment with divine intention. And this question also has a deeper connotation also, which is, he says it's also for strengthening the soul. Because when we go through a process of an illness, first of the falling down with the illness and realizing, oh, what I thought I was, maybe I wasn't. I thought I was moving in this direction, all of a sudden I can't. So I have to kind of step back, and I have to kind of redefine who and what I am, and why was I going in that direction in the first place, and what's my intention, basically. So that's the first thing that comes back. And then the second thing is the process of rising above the boundaries or limitations that are brought by the illness. So the process of rising above means the illness is there, and it's a reflection or manifestation of some darkish energy in the body, something that's incomplete. And what you're asked to do in energy healing is to find the other side of the coin. You need to find the complement. When we find the complement and we put the two complementary pairs together, all of a sudden we have wholeness. Remember I said that's how we navigate the ocean of consciousness, right? That anytime you have two complementary pairs of opposites, you can use them as a means of navigating the ocean of consciousness. So it's no longer like confusing field of uncertainty and chaos. All of a sudden the field of consciousness becomes orderly and it becomes accessible. We look at it in terms of its complementary pairs of opposites, then everything makes sense. All right, I hope, did that help? Did that answer the question? Oh, that was your question. Great question. Thank you. Okay, so I guess I've taken us past our hour a little bit. It's an hour and 15-minute session. I would like to thank everybody who asked more questions. And looks like a lot of the points that came in my question box were actually from my technical advisor. And so maybe those aren't questions that we don't need to address tomorrow. But I will definitely, I'd like to address the other questions at tomorrow's session. Thank you everyone so much for being with me tonight. I hope you enjoyed all the healings. I sure did. May your ancestors also enjoy the healings, and God bless them all. And it was really exciting for me to be with everybody. So I hope we can do that again. Please come back tomorrow. Those of you who are on the subscription program, you're most welcome. And anybody else everybody's welcome. Everybody's welcome. And I'll look forward to connecting again with everybody then. Thank you everyone for your contributions tonight. Bye. So I'm just enjoying the sweetness and the softness of our group this morning. There's something so lovely, so tender in the energy that's present in our group at this time. It's very, very sweet. And it's highly supportive of taking a nice deep dive into the finest level of the physiology, the causal level of the physiology. I'm using the word causal to describe the finest relative level of the body. Yesterday's recap, we looked into little pockets of past karma that was born of ignorance. Sometimes we don't know better. We don't know what's the right thing to do, so we do things that weren't necessarily life-supporting for everybody, and the result is somebody suffers. If it's not the individual who's doing the action at the moment, then it's somebody else suffers. And anytime the action promotes suffering, we can call that the seeds of the bad karma. Because what the karma is, it's good I'm describing this. You know, I should have done this yesterday. What is karma exactly? Karma is action. Karma is the rebound, you could say, or the byproduct of actions taken from the past. So every action that we take kind of ushers out into the field of life, into the web of life, and it bounces off of everything that's out there, and then it kind of it reflects back. And some of the things we do are very nice, and when the karma comes back, it's a blessing. And some of the things we do aren't so nice, or we have done in the past, maybe weren't the nicest, and then that comes back as a problem. And then there's also like neutral karma. So that's one way of subdividing karma, is good karma, bad karma, and neutral karma. And that's a traditional Vedic subdivision. But then there's another division, which I find is useful for energy healing. And remember, the ocean of consciousness can be navigated infinite number of ways. Anytime we have complementary pairs of opposites, we have a context or pillars for understanding the navigation of the ocean of consciousness. Any complementary pairs of opposites will do. Okay, so another way is we can look at karma from the context of big to large, or no, small to large. Small to large. So there can be like individual karma, even maybe some specific part of the body, like the liver has karma, or the eyes have karma, or something like that. Karma can get stuck in a specific organ, or even at a cellular level, or at a DNA level. We were working yesterday doing healings for ancestors, which we often do, so no surprise there. definitely check out yesterday's video. So individual karma, and then the karma of a person versus family karma, right? Versus more like societal karma, like the whole culture can have a karma, or your city can have karma, or the whole world karma, or you can go out bigger, and there can be a karmic level of the solar system. Our solar system goes through some experience where all the planets have to deal with that experience at the same time. Or like some big wind comes out of the sun and it comes to all the planets, right? Or even galactic karma or universal karma. So that's another way of looking at it. And I found that that can be useful in energy healing. So just throwing that out there. All right, so karma is action born of ignorance. And I think most of the healings yesterday were oriented towards smoothing out the relationship of the individual with truth, with our essential truth, so that ignorance doesn't end up factoring into action. That's the basic thrust of this, because yeah, it's good to clear those karmic blocks, but it's good to clear what's behind them, which the roots, the seeds, which are the ignorance. So I'm looking at the whole field, and I'm coming back, as you know, as everyone knows, in the 2 weeks or the 3 weeks between webinars, I spend a lot of time receiving information about the upcoming topic. So as it is, the way divinity works, sometimes what you receive doesn't have a really clear or obvious connection to what it is that the question that's being asked. It doesn't always. So yesterday, this really beautiful, glorious picture opened up for me, which was of the astral field. Now, I often talk about how karma is at the causal level. It's at the finest level. And yesterday we talked a lot about the junction between unmanifest and that finest relative manifest. But today I was exploring more, and this picture keeps coming up of the astral field, or the web of life, that kind of belt of that region of creation, which is threads or streams of consciousness. And a lot of sorting out gets done at that level. And what I realized was that the astral level is where we set up or set in our beliefs and belief systems. And it's very interesting because beliefs have this ability to, first of all, they're the foundation for feelings, for a lot of our feelings. There's the finest level of feeling down at the causal level, which is deeper than beliefs. But then the beliefs reflect up to the next level up and give rise to very specified feelings. For example, when I was a little girl, I lived in Australia, and we lived with the Yuryorant people in the Australian outback who were, they were the native Aborigines of Australia. And among them, there was a belief that if someone pointed a bone at you, you would die. So of course, to us Westerners, that seems like a silly belief, right? I mean, if someone's going to point a bone at you and you die, that's silly. That's not going to happen. But while we were there, one guy pointed a bone at another guy and he died. So, and fortunately that belief, and I know that's not the happiest example, please forgive. But anyway, it was the one that sort of struck my mind earlier today when I was looking at it. Because it's a dramatic example. It's a really dynamic example. And God bless both of those men for their role in that little drama of creation, that they did that. So the thing is that beliefs can have a really, really intense, powerful effect, and they can modify the effects of action. They can modify the effects of karma. They can modify the effects of karma. And what you do in the moment can modify the effects of karma. So this particular webinar about clearing karmic blocks, I think maybe should have been renamed Modifying Karmic Blocks, because karma will be coming back to us all the time. And it's the way we function in the moment. And that means, one of the points brought up yesterday, that means really deeply adhering to truth. Because Truth is the vehicle upon which consciousness rides in order to maintain and perpetuate its alignment with cosmic evolution, with divine center of creation, with the divine self, with divine being. It's when, as an individual, we're riding on that leg of truth, that stream of truth, that all action is aligned with being. I'm just feeling it. And what's happening is everyone's astral body and the astral web of life, the web of life is opening up. And as that does so, I'm enjoying an infusion, seeing an infusion of truth from the finest level of creation. And this is very interesting because, you know, the question of truth has been debated by philosophers for centuries, since the Greeks. The Greeks started debating what is truth really. Oh, well, beauty is truth, and there are all these different ideas of what is truth. The reason that particular question is debated, this is coming to me now, thank you to all of you. Most of the information I get during the webinars as a byproduct of being in your beautiful presence. So deeply appreciated. Anyway, because the source of truth is an unknowable quality-less field of being. So as adept as any of us may be at using speech to define the unknowable, the undefinable, the unmanifest, speech always will have certain limitations. There always comes this point where the philosophers are just like debating semantics, right? They start out with high intentions and then they just get down to, yeah, well, it's just what do you mean by that word? And what do I mean by that word? So that's why that's one of those debates that never really completed. It never got a resolution. So what that means is that the level of truth that we're working with here is not describable. It's not even knowable by the senses of perception, the gross senses. Our gross senses, as mentioned yesterday, are highly limited in their capacity to pick up information. They're actually more like filtration structures than they are, I mean, they're, okay, with all due honor to the senses, and they are our tools for knowing the relative, but the reality is that they are only picking up just a small range of the electromagnetic frequency. All of the senses, that's what they're doing. They're picking up a small range of the electromagnetic. We know there's more, right? Because from the level of the direct experience of being, it is evident that there is more. So here we come to the awakening of the aspect or the areas of the being, and that's in the astral field, because we're looking at beliefs, because beliefs are also filtration systems. If we have a belief, it limits. Any belief limits, but you have to have some beliefs, right? Otherwise, all of creation falls apart. So, very interesting. Causal level of physiology, there are archetypal structures which are held in common and have been held in common by people for centuries upon centuries. And there's a structure there, which is the lawmaker. It is the rule maker. In Vedic terms, we call it Manu. It has a name in Vedic terms, which hopefully we're going to get to that section about relationships today, because I wanted to get to it last night, but didn't, so fingers crossed. Anyway, Manu is that commonly held form in the causal level of creation. So it's like a shape or space in your causal body, which has been defined over centuries and centuries by many people as that. We can even think of it as the region of the causal body, which is like an archive of all the universal laws. You can think of it that way too. So you can think of it as a space, you can think of it as a being, you can think of it as a collection of the laws, each one which hums or resonates with within its own nature, like that. This is activating, and that part of the causal body is folding into the astral body. And the astral body is where we form so many of our beliefs. So that folding is a very interesting thing that's happening, and it's as that's it's kind of more, it's not so much like it's folding, it's more like it's just looking. I feel as if that area that holds those laws of nature doesn't want to become as gross as the astral level. It just wants to, like reflect off of it, just reflect off of it. So that's, I think, why the tenderness, because our astral bodies looks like not going to receive like as a light medicine, for example, those specific resonations of this truth, because the specific resonations of the truth are way too subtle to actually come up to the astral body. So my question is then, how do we forge a relationship between the astral body and that Manu region of finest relative manifestation that owns and possesses all those structures that support the manifestation of the whole material realm in a way that allows it to reflect perfectly divine being, perfectly divine being. And we know that's what we're really working with, because anytime we're talking manifestation, we're like, well, my life is great, but there's this one area or something, you know, or I'd like to be able to just like stick out my hand and bingo, something, something manifests on the hand or whatever, you know, however we want to do that process. So I'm looking at the relationship. And as we know, the astral level is full of these threads or beams of consciousness. And I actually see the threads and beams of consciousness as one of the fundamentals of relationship, right? Because they go between people and they go between parts of the body. All the meridians of the body are comprised of these threads, and our bodies, the cord of light that runs through the body is a great ancient thread of being. And so the astral body's usual mode of operating when we want to create a relationship is to send out a little thread. It's like, oh, well, I could send a thread. Well, guess what? Threads are too crude to go there. So it's not going to happen that way. So, okay. And I'm just getting this as I'm speaking at you guys. I'm actually just making sense of something that is kind of very abstract and kind of unknown territory, basically. So thank you for bearing with me. All right, so threads don't work. But the astral body, it's that belief system center of the astral body that needs the formulas or the laws from Manu. It needs the laws from the, just saying the word Manu was just like, that word is so compact with structure. I love it. Manu. Wow. Okay. Oh, okay. So the word Manu has an energy frequency, obviously. And that energy frequency is something that can be picked up or can be integrated with the astral body. So how is that going to happen? And I'm already seeing, very interesting. All right, so I have to give a little bit brief description of the landscape of the astral body, a little bit more detail in order to describe what I'm seeing. Okay, so the sorting that takes place in the astral body is impulses of intelligence rise up from the source of creation, and they get to that astral level where all those beliefs are, and the beliefs tend to either support that intention, desire, that impulse of intelligence, or make it difficult for it, act like mud so it can't get up to the surface. So either it's letting stuff through or it's folding intentions and impulses of self back into the source of creation for further refinement and for modifications so that when they come out again, they come out better. All right, so that's happening. So my question is, well, this was from the download that I got yesterday, I think, yes. Anyway, so my question was, okay, so where is that exactly happening? Like, where in the astral field do we draw the line between when something is allowed to come forward and to bubble up to the surface and manifest, or it doesn't? And as I was looking, couldn't find the line. What I found was that in the web of life, there are appears to be infinite number of nodes. Everywhere the lines cross, there's like a little node, there's like a little energy center. And each one of those energy centers is a form of wholeness. It contains the complementary pairs of opposites that are chugging against each other like the pistons of the engine of the car, right? Going, or they're rolling against each other like that. And they're giving rise to the energy that allows intention or desire to move up to the surface. So what I realized is that sorting is happening at every point in the astral field, every single point. And there are lots of them because the astral cords go from tiny, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you. It was so exciting. I had to sneeze. No, the body got like, oh, anyway. Anyway, okay. Settling down just a little bit because we got to bring this back to the other point, which is how do we get the energy frequency of Manu? And I can't help enjoying saying it because every single time it comes out of my mouth, it comes with the specific energy frequency, which is so luscious and so beautiful. And blessings. I just have to give blessings and gratitude to where that is coming from, which is a whole nother story. So I don't want to digress and get sidetracked, but all right. So every node in the web of life is humming with this energy frequency that promotes it fuels the manifestation of creation. And I'm looking at where the energy frequency of Manu can go there. And what I'm seeing is it goes in the gaps. If you imagine, oh, this is cool. This is new. I've never seen anything like this before. Okay, imagine there's like a grid, right? A web like that. And at every node, there's something. But look, see, there's spaces. There's spaces. They're infinitely small spaces. Infinitely small. Because the threads of the web of life go down to infinitely small, and they're throughout the whole creation. So the spaces are infinitely small. They're like kind of around the nodes. They're between. If you think of the threads like that, they're just lined up like the threads of fabric or something. Infinitely small. So Manu is there. Okay, the fact that we're putting our attention and that that awareness is being allowed to feel down to infinitely small and then find Manu in the infinitely small spaces is creating a tickling effect for Manu. It's creating an activation or an enlivenment of that quality of being, which is Manu. So Manu is actually receiving some kind of like a healing, like an energy healing, we could say. This does bring us to that point that I wanted to share with everyone about the relationships. Because when we're working with the causal field of self, which is where karma tends to sit, the question is, what is the most effective way to deal with karmic blockages? What is the most useful approach? And we've talked before about 3 different ways of looking at karma. You can look at it as regions or spaces. Or looking at the causal field, we can look at it as comprised of regions or spaces. We can look at it as comprised of vibrations, or we can look at it as comprised of humming spaces, right? Regions that are like lively like that, which are beings. That's what beings are. Beings that are subtle, causal body beings. So this is where it gets a little bit, the belief about what the causal body is and how we approach it is important here. Because this is the spot where if we look at the causal body as beings, which are like separate from my being, then separation is the fundamental belief underlying the relationship. And unfortunately, any value of separation at this point isn't particularly useful, because the reason we're forging the relationship in the first place is for the integration of divinity in the relative. It's for integration. So if separation is the underlying function, then integration, those are opposites. And they don't, oh, actually they can work nicely together. It's okay. Because pairs, complementary pairs of opposites can work, but they, I'm looking at it, I'm looking at it, I'm looking at it. Okay, here's what I'm seeing. Looking at this area of the causal field where we forge a relationship with the causal body structures which are responsible for everything that manifests at the relative. If we're approaching the relationship from the surface, then it's natural to understand it in terms of like a process. Like I'm forging a relationship. The minute you say the word relationship, already there's separation, right? Because what's to relate to? If it's being, it's just the self. There's no need for a relationship. It just is. From the inside out. From the inside out is the integration, is the, oh, it just is side of the picture. So these two have to come together. So these are the complementary pairs of opposites that we're working with in this particular part of this energy healing webinar. I know, it's so interesting. When there's a relationship, it's easier to talk about that side because it's like describable, right? When there's a relationship, there's a potential. There's a potential for evolutionary transformation, and there's a potential for like love, right? There's a potential for all sorts of beautiful, sweet, glorious, amazing, yummy, incredible experiences that we as humans with our nervous systems that experience life in a sequential unfoldment, then we get to have those experiences. If there's no separation, if there's no relationship, because it's just one thing, so what's to relate, it just is one thing, then that one thing is the source of all relationships and of all those yummy experiences. Okay. It's just unfolding. What can I say? So, all right, so we've got the one thing is the source of all those individual experiences. Both are necessary. If they weren't necessary, they wouldn't be. Okay, now I'm seeing the energy of Manu seating in the third chakra. Right there. Wants to sit at the seat of power in the body, right? That's the spot where it starts. Oh, the power spot is also correlated with those nodes in the web of life where the complementary pairs of opposites sit, right? Because those little complementary pairs of opposites are the engine. So it's their relationship, it's their churning against each other that is the engine. So that's here in the third chakra. I would imagine that this is also going to be a nice healing for digestion, because third chakra is also sort of it's the energy center that administrates the digestive, all these pitta organs that are right along the central belt of the body: liver, gallbladder, stomach, pancreas, spleen, etc. Kidneys. Those organs have to work with opposites. They have to work with opposites. They get there, when you have the opposites, you get the transformation because they move with each other. So what's happening in the third chakra area is very, very fine discrimination is also coming in. The fine discrimination supports the ability to do the work at a very delicate level, at a very sensitive, like highly perceptive level. You know, I've talked in past webinars about how the magnetic field of the heart is 60 times more powerful than the magnetic field of the other organs of the body. So the heart's kind of like the boss, But here's an interesting concept coming up right now, and that is, even though the other organs of the body have less power than the heart to produce a magnetic field and therefore influence what goes on in the body, if particular areas of the body take on a very highly coherent relationship with each other, then they can collectively produce a magnetic field that will be able to respond to the heart or counteract the heart or interface with that powerful magnetic field being produced by the heart in such a way as to promote evolutionary transformation for the heart. Right? Because if the heart is the boss and what it says goes, how does it evolve? And we know if it is the boss, it darn well better be evolving, because we don't want a boss who's just sitting on his butt doing nothing, right? We need a boss who, like, you know, he's on. He's doing his thing. So he, she, the heart. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. I'm seeing the coordinated energies of the organs in the pitta belt area of the body. Pitta meaning like that sort of fiery hot element that's in the body. So the organs of digestion working together. First thing that's happening is there's some clearing of the meridians that run both down and up through the torso. And that clearing is of beliefs, false beliefs that have yoked to them all various unnecessary structures, such as self-identification structures. And of course, I said beliefs. Oh, also, along with the beliefs, there's certain very interesting filtration structures that are present. And this happens, if anybody's familiar with the work of the scientific philosopher Thomas Kuhn. So what he discovered by looking back through history was that what will happen is the scientific community will hold a particular set of beliefs about paradigm. In fact, he coined the word paradigm, about the nature of reality. And then what happens is, over the course of time, little bits of information, like back in the day, like the earth is flat, right? Or something like that. Or the universe is earth-centric, something like that. So there'll be a belief, and it seems to work. It's pretty good. And then little bits of information will come in that don't jive with that, or that belief system. And so there's this particular type of filtration system that comes into play right there. I'm not sure Thomas Kuhn recognized that, but we're looking at it. And that is that, that if the belief doesn't fit, there's a natural tendency to say, well, this experience doesn't fit with my belief system. There's a tendency to go, well, maybe that experience isn't real. Maybe it's false. Or maybe I can bend my memory of the experience so that it fits my paradigm. Or so either one just rejects the experience out of hand or tries to manipulate it so it fits the paradigm. Of course, what happens to complete that cycle of understanding, what happens is, over time, too many pieces of information come in that do not fit the paradigm. And then at some point, everybody's scratching their head and just going, you know what, this paradigm, I think maybe the world isn't flat, you know, or maybe the earth isn't the center of the universe, maybe, you know. And then what happens is the old paradigm goes out, and it takes a little while. There's a period of chaos where we do what we're doing right now, which is going into the field and just exploring. It's like exploring the unknown. We're all kind of swimming together in this thing. And I just can't tell you how grateful I am to all of you, especially for the integration of yesterday's healings, which are part of today's session. So everybody's getting those healings also, even though I didn't describe them in great detail, which one of them was that shift of conception of self from being more body-centric to being more field of consciousness-centric. So what happens is the predominant experience is, I am this field of being with a body which is the little vehicle in the middle that I'm driving. Rather than, I am this body person and I've got consciousness in me or something like that. No, 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 you are that, you are that. You are that reverberating field of self. Beautiful. So it's because all of us are at that level of experience where we can experience ourselves as a reverberating field of being, that we can start to, we have then a vehicle that can do things different from what the physical vehicle can do, right? We can explore into these areas and we can find out what's actually going down in those places. This is very exciting. Thank you for being with me. Can't do it without you. I love you. Okay, I'm seeing more questions popping in, and I thank everyone for the questions, and I want everyone to know that I will address them at the end. I'll save some time at the end this time, maybe a little more than I saved last night, so I can get to everything. All right. So the reverberating field of each of us, and then all of us as a collective, is looking at this effect that's taking place in the physiology and taking place in the field, and considering the quality of Manu, because Manu puts everything in order. And that is the tool, that is the vehicle that one needs to dive into the field of chaos, the field of the unknown, and make sense out of it. Oh, okay. So I'm understanding Manu in a way I never did before. Just throwing it out there to everyone. My first direct experience of Manu was when I was on teacher training, and I suspect that it may be coming up now because my son is there, and he may be right at the same point in the course that I was when I had this experience. So there's some harmonious resonation between those two physiologies. But I had this cognition of Manu when I was on teacher training. And it just came, and it was really, really simple. It was right after meditation. And we were up at the top of this very high mountain, and our meditation hall had windows all the way around. So you could kind of look out and just see vistas, kind of like this beautiful picture behind me. And I understood, the name came to me, the word Manu came to me like clear as a bell, and it felt almost as if it wasn't coming from, it was coming from everywhere, within and without me all at the same time, kind of like that. And it was such a beautiful feeling associated with that. So going back to that first moment that I had that cognition, I'm compare and contrasting it to the energy frequency of Manu that we're getting right now. So we get Manu folding in on its own nature a little bit, so that we get that. I love the shape my hands are making. Okay, sorry. And okay, and yeah, that's actually a universal form for manifestation. Just throwing that out there to everyone. There's a universal, like the cube. It's like a cube form. And there's a way of looking at it where it kind of spirals in on its own nature, it spirals into the closest point, and that, that allows awareness to draw into the area that supports the manifesting process. Just saying. Okay. So over the last 2, 3, 4 webinars, we've been looking a lot at Dharma, the 4 legs of Dharma, and the value of truth, and how useful having that value of truth is in the energy healing process. Today, I see that we're taking that to a whole nother level. What I was going to say about that cognition was, years ago, when I heard that name Manu come to me, I knew the name Manu in context of Vedic knowledge, and Manu is considered the lawgiver in Vedic terminology. So I kind of, you know, when you think of a lawgiver, you kind of think of like somebody who kind of looks around and decides what's right and what's wrong, and maybe he passes judgment, and kind of like a judge, kind of, right? A lawgiver, like the judges are responsible for holding the law. But I realized today that that is not the case. I mean, that is partly at a very gross, superficial level. That might be a nice interpretation of Manu. But Manu is actually that value of creation that defines the limitations of the universe and supports the ability of individuals such as ourselves, if we we could say we ride on the shoulders of Manu, we ride on the consciousness of Manu into the field of the unknown, into the field of that quality-less, unknowable quality. It is all-knowing, but unknowable quality of being, that area of divinity, which is beyond everything. Brahman is beyond everything. That Manu is the formula, you could say, for understanding as you go, for understanding the unfoldment, the way Brahman unfolds. Beautiful, beautiful. And the beautiful thing about Manu is that Manu, because remember, it came up, that energy frequency came up. I'm like, oh, let's bring it into the astral field. I'm like, oh, we can't. Because it's also at that status. It's also at that, you could say that it is, could we say, I'm going to ask being, could we say that Manu is somehow an integrated aspect of Brahman, or is somehow, no, is Manu is a part of the relationship between the whole relative level of expression and experience and reality and that unknowable level of reality. So Manu is sort of like sitting at the gap, we could say, between the relative and the absolute. Okay, well, okay, so that's the answer that came back. Okay, so I'm now debating, this is me debating live with, with being. So I'm saying, well, I mean, aren't all the causal body forms sitting at the gap, right? Because the causal field sits at the gap between the relative and the absolute, right? So the region for structuring all structures is there, and the region for most profound healing is there, and all the forms of self which promote healing are there, and so forth. So what makes Manu different? Why is Manu a more useful tool for diving, for integrating the relative with the absolute? Why is Manu a more useful tool? The answer is that Manu is that region or form of self that understands the structure of the unfolding process. Okay. And yesterday we talked about that in more detail. I went into this whole abstract section yesterday where I kind of talked about the 3 values of Rishi, Devata, and Chandas, folding in on themselves, that whole thing. So that's what Manu is about. Is that what Manu understands, that, and understands the way the layering builds up, where Rishi looks at Devata, and then we've got, you know, Devata qualified Rishi and Rishi Devata qualified Devata, like that, and then Rishi Devata looks at Chandas, and you've got Rishi Devata qualified Chandas, and Chandas qualified Rishi Devata, like that, and the layers just build up and build up. So is that what Manu is looking at or is understanding? No, it's a larger sphere than that. It's a larger sphere. It includes those layers of creation, and then also as they interface through the entire range from subtle to gross. Okay, so Manu's bigger. Manu's looking at more, some of the denser levels of manifestation too. Okay, that's good. So my question is, if Manu is the tool, the lawgiver is the tool for integrating divinity into the relative, what do we need to know right now in order to, and what do we need to heal right now in order to make sense of that? Oh, thank you. Good. Our Vedic scientists are coming at us now, are coming through with some questions and some points. Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, upstairs directly above there. Yeah. Okay. All right. When I'm saying what do we need to understand right now, I'm going back to the energy frequency of Manu. That lovely, just, it's powerful and it's rich and it's just so nice and it's so indescribable. And so, got it. So, in order to harness the aspects of the causal field, which will interface directly with unwanted karma, and will help us modify karma. One of the realizations I had recently about karma is that it may not be possible to really eliminate karma, but it certainly is possible to modify it. And we do that in the present, in this moment, which I think we talked about yesterday a bit. But the aspects of the causal field that do those modifications, that are responsible for those modifications of karma, so that instead of breaking your leg, you just like chipped a toenail and hardly noticed it, or, you know, something like that. Or instead of, you know, just getting some little tiny thing, somebody brings you something big. So sweet. Anyway, so those laws of nature that do that, Manu is one of the main drivers behind it. We could say that Manu is the determinant that allows us to understand how to organize our own causal field, like which regions we need to create, because the causal field is very flexible and fluid, and it responds to our consciousness. So how to organize the various regions so that they interact in a harmonious manner, and how to approach that process. So that's Manu's role also, is like helping to organize that. It's like Manu sits as the organizer behind our fundamental structures of organizing, basically. Like, how do we interface with our finest level of creation? And one of the points that comes up to me here is, and this I was thinking of, it was one of the downloads over the last few weeks, was that ultimately the most powerful work that we do with our own causal bodies is when we approach the causal field as a field of being. You know, I mean, if we need to go in and sometimes deal with structures as regions, as structures, or as vibrations, you know, we want to draw up some light medicine. Well, that's a vibration coming out of the causal field. But the most powerful work is done through the forging of very intimate, very beautiful, very intense relationships with those structures in our own causal field, and particularly the archetypal structures which are held in common in the collective, because those have more oomph to them, essentially. Okay, so we need to do a little examination, little deeper description of the landscape at the causal level. So causal being finest level of feeling. And I'll make this point, and then I will go to questions, because we got questions and comments coming up all over the place. Thank you very much. Wow. Okay. Oh boy. Okay. So when we approach these forms of creation, which are subtler than human body, as beings, but we approach them with the same universal value of love and reverence and gratitude and appreciation, then that causes a harmonious activation in the relationship between the individual and that form. So that's the bottom line right there. Now, as far as the landscape goes, remember I was saying at the astral level, there's like a lot of sorting that goes out, and impulsive intelligence comes up, and some energies block some certain impulses, and other energies allow them to come forward. Well, at the causal level, there's something like that happens, but it happens in a much more collective, much more as a collective effect. And that is that, sometimes knowledge is very exciting. So what it is that everyone's causal body is the same causal body, all shared in common, but we portion it off differently. Everybody divides up their house slightly differently. So the rooms are different sizes, and the structures that they lean upon there in the causal body are different. One person may lean upon one person leans on their compassionate nature very much. So they're leaning upon more of those sort of feminine qualities that are in their causal body, for example, like the mother divine qualities. And other people lean on their logic or their strength or whatever. So we customize each person customizes their relationship with the causal field. However, there are certain forms that are archetypal and have been there forever and ever and ever. And some of these archetypal forms overlap with each other. So you get forms like Mother Mary in the Christian tradition and Kuan Yin in the Eastern tradition. And I'm sure there are Mother Divine forms like, Mother Lakshmi, who is the mother of loving compassion and so forth. So we get overlaps in a lot of them based on various traditions. And religious traditions provide a context for people to forge a personal relationship with those archetypal forms. The archetypal forms are, by nature, I just mentioned a minute ago, they have more oomph behind them because as a collective of humanity, we feed them essentially with our recognition of their existence. And certainly anybody who's, offering their loving respect and devotion and reverence to those forms is empowering those aspects of the causal body. Remember, they are not separate from you. They are not separate of you. They are you. They are you. They are universal. We all have choices. We all pick up different forms from the causal field. Some people go through their whole life and never really relate to that Mother Mary, Kuan Yin, Mother Lakshmi form. So everybody's different. Everybody's different. This is why there is some value in appealing to the forms that are more universally held, the more archetypal forms, because those forms are already more established. If I need a particular healing, say for my tooth or my nose or my ear or something, for some part of me, if I need a healing for some part of me, I can custom create a little shape that will, for at least the temporary time that I'm doing that particular healing work, will interact with the rest of my causal field in such a way as to give rise to vibrations. Because remember, we create those forms and they're like little resonating spaces. When consciousness moves through, it hums inside that space, and that resonation eventually moves up to the astral level and becomes the threads of consciousness. It becomes beams or threads of consciousness, which then form the scaffolding on which the belief system sits, on which then we react emotionally to our own beliefs. Like if you believe that something's scary, I'm allergic to bees, and if I get a bee sting, it'll kill me. Then you get scared when you see a bee. Whereas somebody who doesn't have that particular belief, then they don't get scared when they see a bee. This is regardless of how the actual effect of the bee sting is on your body. I'm just saying that the belief then will give rise to an emotion, right? And then the emotions are fundamental to the kind of thoughts that we create, like, oh, I'm going out, maybe I better take my EpiPen with me, right? So that's a thought. And then it works its way up to the physical material. All right. So that was that point about our relationship with the causal field. That was very exciting for me because that was new knowledge, and I can't do this without you, so I love you guys. I love these events so much just because of that. It's amazing. Okay, here's a question. Here's a Vedic science question. So we're going to get in here and cut some fine lines now. In the 8 limbs of yoga, Yama is the lawgiver. Oh, okay. So yes, Niyama is the law, and asana, the law, is that the two, fullness and emptiness, are seated together. Pranayama, it has the word yama in it. Pranayama, or ayama, which would be the opposite of yama, right? Yama and ayama, is the pulsating. So it has both. It has the yama and that's very interesting. So that's from the perspective of the limbs of yoga. that yama is the lawgiver, niyama is the law, and asana, the law, is that the two fullnesses, the fullness and the emptiness, are seated together and are pulsating back and forth, pulsating back and forth. Oh, this pulsating between fullness of fullness and fullness of emptiness, something, thank you, underlies and sustains the entire creation. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So this is what is seated in these nodes of the web of life, where you have the complementary pairs of opposites. And there's this pulsating back and forth, and that's creating that energy that sustains the whole creation. But it also happens at deeper level too. It also happens at the causal. I'm just describing it at the astral because a lot of this webinar has been about the downloads that I was getting about the astral field. Okay, so here comes the question. How does this relate to Manu? And how does this relate to your causal astral paradigm? Okay, thank you. Good question. So my understanding of yama, the way I've been using the word yama, and with all due respect, because you're more of an expert in Vedic science than I am, that yama is sometimes considered the god of death, because, yes, what?
What Mark said is that sort of a limited interpretation.
Right, it's a limited interpretation.
Emptiness. It's like emptiness is full.
Oh, thank you. So what he said was that that's kind of a limited, the god of death ideas is kind of a limited interpretation, but that yama is the emptiness, and then niyama is the fullness. And so the fullness, the pulsating is between the emptiness and the fullness. My understanding with yama, and when I say the word yama, there's also an impulse there's like a energy signature that goes with it. And with yama, there's an element of, yama interfaces with karma. Also, yama interfaces with karma in that the judgment or the choice of the moment when the karma comes back is in the hands of yama. The choice, the determining intelligence that says, oh, now is the time to deal with this much of your past karma. Whereas my experience is that Manu has a kind of a smoother, like not so much interfacing with the relative. When I go to Manu, I find something that isn't really comfortable moving up into the relative. Whereas when I put the word of yama, for some reason, yama is more comfortable at a more relative level. Maybe at that level of the astral field where those yama and niyama, we can clearly define, they're pulsating back and forth, something like that. Yeah, does that answer? Thank you. Was a beautiful question. Wow. So, and also my second question based on your question would be then, how does the position of yama and the yama, niyama, and asana, and pranayama then relate to Brahma? How does that system interface with Brahma? And what I'm getting is that this whole premise of the yama, niyama, asana, and pranayama it's a structure which provides an understanding of the way the fine mechanics of manifestation occur from the finest level of the relative up through that astral level. So it's definitely subtle and it's definitely underlying the relative. Whereas Manu still, to me, feels like it's like deep, deep inside. And even when I feel like the seat of Manu, when I say Manu in my body, it goes right back into that that cerebellum area that we're healing in yesterday's session. So it's like somehow like deeply embedded. And it would be interesting to go to Roger Ram's book and see if he seats Manu somewhere in the body. Where does he seat yama? Where does he seat Manu? That would be very interesting to look it up. Note to self, go take a look at that book which correlates physiology with Vedic science. Okay, we've got a ton of questions coming in here, guys. So I'm going to do some online questions from our online community here. Okay, question from last night. Each person is the center of his or her world. In a sense, we are always in conflict because it takes a rare person to see from the collective center of, to see from not the individual center of the world, but the collective center of the world. Wow, that's a beautiful question. That is a beautiful point. It's a point. It's a point. And I feel that the healings that we did, and maybe because this was a question from yesterday, that healing to shift the sense of self from more body-centric identification to more energy field-centric identification was essentially aimed at that. The source of self, the divine source of self, is that collective center of our world, of our universe. So ultimately, that's the point of reference. But the thing about that divine, infinite, unbounded self is that it's unknowable. So from a relative point of view, like you see me up here, and then occasionally I'll get less like, oh, my hands are so interesting, right? It's like I get off the track. I derail slightly, but anyway. It really ultimately is our center. It is really the true center. And I think all the work that we've been doing in this webinar has been aimed at supporting a restructuring of the very subtle levels of self in order to promote a more sustained, more continuous experience of the direct divine being, and it moving up into the, and finding a way to express within the constraints and boundaries and limitations of the relative. That's what I'm doing with that one for right now. But same question, I mean, same person asked another question, also from last night. My great-great-grandmother lost 3 children in one day from measles. Oh, in the 1870s likely. Oh, so yeah, maybe we were referencing last night some of the rough stuff that people have to go through in the relative. Just a point on that though, because that's bad news when that happens. You want to bring your question up, sweetheart?
Oh no, it was for it's just an analogy.
Oh, okay. We can talk about it after too.
Yeah.
Okay. Children provide a quality of relationship with divinity for their parents, which is unique. So when a couple comes together, there's often a quality, ideally, there's a quality of love that's new and exciting and unique and beautiful and very life-giving for both members of that party. But when a child arrives, the child brings a perspective of such purity and sweetness and a love that is so innocent and so unfettered by agendas or intentions, specific intentions or anything. It's just such a pure love. That is the gift that the child brings the mother and father, but most of the mother. Not gonna lie, mom gets the bulk of it. Thank you very much. Anyway, later, dad and the child, they grow into it more later. But at first, it's just this deep, tender feeling. And sometimes the child, the thing about that relationship is that even if the body dies, the relationship doesn't die. And that goes for anyone you love. If the body dies, your relationship with them doesn't die. It continues to evolve. Unless, of course, you've got a belief and you choose to cut off the relationship at that point. And I'm not saying that we should be talking to ghosts or anything like that. That's kind of silly. But a relationship, it goes deep. It goes deep. It goes way past talking to ghosts is like more on the relative level of experience, right? But this goes deep. The relationship remains like holy. So your grandmother produced these 3 babies, and then she went through a period where the rest of her life she had their support. I lost a baby once. I smile. It wasn't really a very pleasant experience. It was hard for both of us. But the quality of love that I experienced with that child is like in a whole nother degree from any quality of love that I experience with those who are in their living bodies, because in the living bodies, we're all kind of constrained by the limitations of our senses of perception and nervous systems. So I feel very, very blessed and fortunate to have a person in my life, a family member of such status, whose very being brings such incredible happiness, and who I had the privilege of being with, even though for just a few months. All right. Also, I think you answered this last night. Yes, I answered that question last night. Okay, next. Okay, here's another question. Holding Manu, silence, the potential for manifestation, is it in itself a creative action? Oh, yes, that's a good question. So the next question is a troll question. I'm not even going to look at that question right now. Okay, so I'll get to the troll question in just a minute. So yes, any interaction whatsoever with Manu is basically a kind of relative experience. It's like we can only understand it or explain it from the level of the relative, but it really isn't on the level of the relative. It really is when this particular type of, this question ties into a little phrase that came up for me over the last couple of weeks, which was the difference between the language of silence and the language of mankind. We could say the language of words and gestures. So words and gestures is one kind of language, and then there's this like language of silence. And I would say that any actual interaction with Manu comes from a level of one's own silence, which is so, and I think maybe that's why I brought up the point about my experience when I was becoming a TM teacher, was that at the time that I had that cognition of Manu, my awareness, it had to be when I had been rounding. So I was long meditation periods. And at the end of a long period of meditation periods repeated over days like that, then the awareness was at a point where it could meet Manu, where it could actually come face to face. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't expect that I would have had that cognition if I hadn't been in that particular environment at that particular time. So it's an action, but you could say it's an action beyond action, or it's a cognition of reality or cognition of self that is itself its own validation. It kind of falls into that language of silence, which is the language of Brahman. It's the language of all this when all the access to the entire Vedic structures, the entire Veda and all that are present. Before I go to the last question, which I do have time for, I would like to just make one more point. And this is another discovery that came up just in the last few weeks, but it was just wonderful. So I referenced in this talk a book written by Rajanataram, where he correlates the Vedic terminology with the parts of the physiology, or the parts of the Ved are correlated with the parts of the physiology. And the point here is that the name of each of the parts of the Ved hold the energetic frequency or vibration of all the text in that area. So the word yoga holds all the yoga, the sound, holds the energetic vibration of all the texts that are within that limb of the Veda. Is it a limb? The 8 limbs of yoga. Okay, but yoga is also a limb. Is it also a limb? Is it
one of the upangas.
It's an upanga, so it's a limb. The upangas are limbs. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Vedangas are the upangas are the subsidiary.
Oh, okay. The Vedangas are the limbs, the upangas are the subsidiary limbs. Thank you very much. Because I'm not a Vedic scientist. However, I do know that these vibrational qualities are like, they're kind of like seeds, like a word, like yoga is like a seed that holds a lot of information inside it, or the word manu that we were using. It holds all those structures that are associated with manu within it. So because the different parts of the Veda are correlated with different parts of the physiology, it means that if some part of the physiology falls down or becomes weak or becomes damaged in some way, corrupted in some way, that the word that correlates with that part of the physiology can be thought of as a blueprint of that part of the physiology in its optimal form, in its ideal form. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out because that's one of the values of that book. It's a nice thing. He took a long time to write that book. He really thought about it. And he got a lot of guidance and support from his teacher, Maharishi, and the Vedic tradition and so forth. So it's a treasure. It's a tool. It's a tool. It's a valuable thing to have. So just saying that. Okay. The question is, did we remove any karmic blocks for manifesting? I know. Well, did we? Whoops. Hang on. Yeah, you're right. It's up to each one of us individually, right?
Did you let it go?
Yeah, right. Did you let it go? Right. So anyway, I hope everybody had the experience of the dissolving. If what we basically did, I would say, rather than going in, so for some people, there were many layers of healing going on during today's session. And some of that involved directly going in, especially when we were working with specific parts of the physiology, actually dissolving the karma that was there in those parts of the physiology. But what we did even more than that was this principle of bringing in the second element, that, okay, we all know that the causal body is malleable and we're creating forms. Forms are being created and dissolved at the causal level of creation all the time. So the karmic blocks are somewhat malleable. This was another realization that came over the last couple of weeks, is for a long time I've been talking about the causal field and how there are all these causal structures there, as if they're kind of set in stone, kind of like the walls I compare them to the walls of a house, which are rather solid. But I realized that they're not, that in fact they're rather malleable. So the karmic blocks actually have this ability to be modified or dissolved. Even it's conceivably possible to dissolve them entirely. But the tools to do it, the introduction of the second element, was to gain familiarity, to forge a pathway, to restructure from the belief system level of self, the astral level, all the way down to the source of being, the relationship with the aspect of consciousness which allows us to explore and identify, to work directly, so each of you can work directly with those causal structures and do so with confidence and facility. So that was the main thing that we did today, was bringing in all those tools. I would like you to leave with tools in your tool chest and with the confidence that you have everything you need to use them. And you can see that when we go diving into the unknown, it can actually be kind of exciting and fun, because what happens is new information, new material arises new valuable forms of self, of creation, come out of that, which are then applicable to life. So, yes.
The word money, then one of these tools.
Yes, the word manu is a tool, but also the restructuring of the filtration system and the physiology. And then from there, that was at a physical level, a physiological level, and that does include last night's healing session. Just letting you know, it's kind of like one big webinar, sort of. And also the belief system. And then also when we were working with the digestive area of the physiology, this is essentially all the enzymes and the hormones and the different structures that are produced by the organs in this part of the body are also physiological tools for making sense of, for breaking down experience, which is, in that case, we're taking in the form of food. We're taking experience in the form of food into the body. And then we're using this upgraded capacity at the pitta belt of the body, the liver and the pancreas and the gallbladder and so the stomach and so forth, to make sense out of that food. So this will support better metabolism. So I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to offer that to everybody too, because improved metabolic process is foundational to health on many levels. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So we came to our hour. We didn't go as much over tonight as we did last night. Yay. We answered all the questions. Yay. So it's good. I love your questions. I love being with you all so much. It's been totally a pleasure and really a lot of fun for me. It's more exciting. It's also a little more scary, but way more exciting to do webinars like this where we're just kind of diving into the unknown. It's really fun. So we'll keep that up. Thank you. Okay, bye to everybody. See you in the, bye. See you in 3 weeks. Bye.